Hey everybody, welcome to week 2 college football. We're going to do a little recap, go game by game, just a little bit here and there. First off, we'll start off in the SEC, where Kentucky stayed home this week after winning last week against Tennessee. They had Georgia visiting. They win 22-17. This was a close one. Kentucky's going with the rookie quarterback Anthony Fields, and he didn't have a very good game this game, but after the first game against Tennessee, I think they got something special in him. Georgia made it close, came down to the wire, threw a big interception by Smitherman in goal line situation, and it cost them. So that brings Kentucky up to 2-0, and Georgia falls to 0-2. Kind of like we had predicted early in the season. Kentucky, I think, is a lot better than they might have thought going in, even with the rookie quarterback. I think they're going to be a force. And Georgia, while they have a really good roster, they still just can't get over the hump in some of these big games. And so until they get there, it's going to be a long season for Georgia. All right, so in game 2, we got Army off of a close loss on the road in South Bend last week. They got to go home to Michie Stadium and welcome the Ducks. And this was a blowout from the beginning. The Black Knights score 72 points, while the Oregon Ducks only score 17. And so what you saw here is quarterback Daryl Slack is on fire right now. They got their wide receiver Coates involved. He's playing a little tight end right now for the injured Eckert, and he is just destroying defenses. Slack went for 650 and 9 touchdowns in this game. One of the better games that you'll see in MFN. So congratulations to Army getting back to 500. They got a couple good, tough home games coming up in the next 2 weeks with BYU and Tennessee coming to town. Oregon, they're reeling a little bit after the first week. I think they were a little underprepared in that first game. This game, I thought they would come in and give Army a little bit better of a battle, but they just had no answer for that Coates tight end play, and so what you saw was them get blown out. Next up, we got two bowl teams from last year. Washington State hosting Ohio State. Ohio State coming off a tough loss against Rutgers in week 1, whereas Washington State had a good game winning their first week. And so I was curious to see how Washington State would react with a good team coming to town. They've kind of been known as a team that beats up on the lesser teams and has trouble against some of the top-tier teams. And this is no different, as Ohio State were able to handle them 24-10 on the road. And let's go look at the stats in this game. Osuna had a miserable game in week 1, but he bounced back a little bit in this game and put up some decent numbers with 2 touchdowns and no interceptions. Although they didn't pass the ball much with only 18 passes, and he was 9 for 18, 155 yards. They did most of their damage on the ground, where rookie Ezekiel Elliott had 126 yards, and a couple other guys had some decent games. So they pounded the ball pretty good. On the flip side, Washington State were able to pass the ball for a significant amount of yards, 352, but they just weren't able to be very consistent. Their completion percentage was real low, and once again, Lencho Wicks is underwhelming in his performance with 33 yards on 15 carries. All right, so that brings us up to a game I was really looking forward to. Is Navy coming off a win in week 1. Hosting the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. The Scarlet Knights, they're a revamped team with a new quarterback, really good defense. They added one of the all-time greats in Keith Thomas to that D-line. It already has one of the better players in Mueller. What you're seeing is that defense is just doing a lot of damage, whereas the quarterback isn't necessarily doing well, but he's not killing them to the point where they're not able to win. And in this one, Rutgers got a huge road win, 38-24 over Navy. Mueller had another huge game with 4 sacks, but I'm just not quite sure what to think about Navy yet. They can play well. I do like Jonah Fran. He had 3 touchdowns in this game, and I think he's a good player. But for some reason, they're not playing the kind of defense that I think they used to play. And until they do that, they're going to be an up and down, inconsistent type of team. When Rutgers, with a 2-0 start, sitting atop the Big Ten all by themselves, with some tough games coming up. So it'll be fun to see how that rookie quarterback starts to progress and see if he can start putting a little bit more of the weight on his shoulders as the year goes by. Next up, we got Miami Hurricanes against the Utah Utes, and this is in Florida. Miami dedicated to putting together some better game plans this year. I think that they're going to do a lot more damage than they had done last year. This is their second win in a row as they sneak one out against Utah, 19-17. And EJ Rue had he didn't have as much time last year, and I think it really showed. As you can see through 2 games, his defense is already looking so much better, and I am excited to see Miami actually contend because they do have some really good talent on this team. The rookie Alex Smith for Utah actually played pretty well. 300 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. I think he's going to be a good one. Just that fumble is the only thing that really makes me nervous when I watch him or when I look at him. But I think he's got the necessary skills to be a good quarterback in the future. And Paul Johnson, he had a decent game. Threw for almost 400 yards, but only 1 touchdown. And his completion percentage was below 50. So not necessarily what you're looking for. And that's probably why you saw the low-scoring game. But they were able to get some good running out of Bonham. Miami got 102 yards out of him. So that's probably the balance that Miami had was probably the difference. All right, next up we got the Florida Gators hosting the Tennessee Volunteers. This was a game I was looking forward to just because Tennessee came out of the chutes on the road at Kentucky and really looked poor. I wasn't sure if that's what we were going to continue to see out of this team or if that was just a kind of a bad week. They bounced back this week against a Florida team that was reeling from a Week 1 loss. On the road, this is a big win for Tennessee. Florida is an up-and-coming team with a lot of talent, but Tennessee's just they just got a different kind of level when it comes to their whole program. And Tennessee won this one 50-31. Good week for DeMartini and company. Chad Ochocinco had a big game. Florida, they're just not getting that consistency out of McKinley. And if you don't have the consistency at quarterback, it's really hard, even with all your weapons, to have a good week in and week out. But if you can't stop a team, you give up 50 points at home, and it's gonna, no matter what your offense is doing, it's going to be really challenging. So they moved to 0-2, whereas Tennessee is back to 1-1, sitting in second. And then we got the Super Conference champion last year, Syracuse Orange, with their first home game, and they hosted Florida State for an inter-division battle in the ACC. This was a crazy game. Syracuse player broke the record for most sacks in a season. Marcus Wilkerson with 10 sacks, which is insane. They were all over Kelly. I don't know if I've seen this many sacks in a while. Jim Kelly was sacked 18 times for 128 yards, and that you can't really do much when your quarterback's on his back all day long. He also threw 2 interceptions, so it was a miserable game for the Florida State offense. I thought Florida State defense actually played pretty decent considering the kind of output the offense was doing. This game was a little bit closer than you would think with those stats, 38-21. So the fact that FSU stayed in it despite giving up 18 sacks and multiple turnovers is a testament to how good this Florida State team can be if they're hitting on all cylinders. Both teams didn't run the ball very well. Although Florida State didn't really try, they only ran the ball 5 times. And Melton actually had 76 yards on 3 carries. So he did break a couple. Unfortunately, they just didn't stick to it. And when you drop back to pass on Syracuse pass D, you're basically asking to get sacked or intercepted because they're one of the best when it comes to pass D. So not a very good game plan, in my opinion, for Florida State, and it showed, and they got the loss. And so it will be Florida State moves to 1-1, and Syracuse is sitting atop the division with 2-0 after 2 really good games. All right, so next up we got The Oklahoma State Cowboys at home against the Washington Huskies, 41-32. Oklahoma State is just right back where they have been for years, sitting atop the division. Not necessarily blowing teams out like they have, but they're still winning games. And in this one, their offense played pretty well, but their defense has given up a lot of points. They tend to be a blitz team, and sometimes that can come back to bite you, especially when you go against a team that's ready for it. Randy Williams had 5 touchdowns, but he also is turning the ball over. He has a tendency to do that every once in a while. And he threw 3 interceptions this game. One player that stood out for me was Oklahoma State's new freshman running back, Bradley Qualls. He had 134 yards. And I'm not sure if he's taking over for Terry Polley or if Terry Polley was just injured in this game. But it'll be interesting because I know Polley, one of the best running backs in our league, is in his last year of his scholarship. So we'll see how that handles itself going forward. As far as Washington, they didn't run the ball well at all, and that's kind of their bread and butter over the years. Myles Gaskins with 17 carries, 39 yards, which is miserable, 2.29 yards per carry. Their new quarterback, Roy Ackley, actually threw for a ton of yards, 468, and 3 touchdowns, but he also threw 5 interceptions. And you're not going to win very many games when you turn the ball over that many times. And so even though the score was close, I think that the turnovers by Ackley was probably the reason why they weren't able to get the road win. And that brings us to Arizona Wildcats hosting interdivision UCLA Bruins. The Bruins coming off a terrible Week 1 loss, as well as Arizona, who lost to USC the first week. So both teams needed to get on the board. Arizona came out flying. They won this game 35-13. The defensive line played really well. The 2 rookies for Arizona played good. Amos Cooper had 3 sacks, and Lewis Sharp, the outside linebacker, had 4 sacks. And then you add Brian Faust, 3 sacks, and you're looking at, they were all over the quarterback for UCLA in this one. And so that's no wonder why Arizona won this game hands away. UCLA just seems to find an answer at quarterback, and William Evans just didn't look that great in this one. Barely 50%, 193 yards, 2 interceptions, 2 touchdowns. So just nothing very special about him at this point. So we'll see how UCLA goes moving forward with this. Arizona bounces back. They need to stay in this race because after last year, they don't want to get too far behind and have to worry about draft picks again. All right, next up was the game of the week. It's Oklahoma versus Alabama. Oklahoma wins this one. It was a tight game, 47-40. I think the difference in this one was both teams were able to pass the ball on the other, but I think Oklahoma's ball hawks, they got more interceptions, which I think was the key. They picked off Seward 3 times. You know what? Although I look at it now that I'm looking at it, Kendall had 3 picks as well. So they both teams turned the ball over a lot. But Kendall was able to get 5 touchdowns compared to Seward's 2 touchdowns. The one big thing that Oklahoma did in this game was they completely shut down Arnold Brown, Week 1's 270-yard running back. He only had 23 yards in this one. Pretty evenly contested game. I think the big difference being at home for Oklahoma. If this game was in Tuscaloosa, Alabama probably wins this one. But good early season matchup of 2 of the better teams in the Super Conference. All right, next up we got Iowa Hawkeyes versus Stanford, and this was a really tight game. I think Stanford was right in it till the end. Unfortunately, their offense just can't get it going, especially that passing game. Their defense played well. Iowa is, it's tough to really gauge them just because they haven't really got their A team on the field yet. Jason hasn't been around to be able to change his lineup, and so Frank White has continued to be inactive, one of the better quarterbacks in football. And so I'm quite surprised that they were able to keep pace with Michigan in the first week on the road. just with their lineup. And then this week they were able to beat Stanford. I think any other team that comes into this game might have beat Iowa. So they're lucky to be sitting at 1-1 with the way their lineup's been set. Cardinal, time to regroup, get that offense going. You have a defense. You just need to move the ball on offense and help that defense out. Next up, we got BYU hosting Fighting Irish, two of the better teams in all football in this one. BYU loses in a heartbreaker, 35-38, where I think they had a really good shot at the end. Notre Dame is, a proven winner, 4-time champions. They find ways to win, just like they did in Week 1 against Army. They found a way to win this week, led by Heisman Trophy Leslie Jocks. Notre Dame's always going to be in it till the end, and so I'm not surprised that they got the victory here. Although I think BYU's closed the gap, and just by only losing by a field goal shows that they'll be more confident going into the next matchup. And we got Texas Longhorns 41, Kansas Jayhawks 28. Kansas still reeling. First they lost the first week against Oklahoma State, and this one was no different. The Longhorns seem to be on the right foot this year with the new owner. They were right in it in their first week. Let me go look. So the first week, they went on the road to Oklahoma and only lost 22-30. So right there shows me that Texas, I always knew they had a lot of talent on that roster. It's just a matter of putting it together. And I think with the addition of Hernandez at tight end to go with some of those other weapons on offense and McCartney at quarterback, I think you're really starting to see Texas making a stand in the Big 12. And so it should be interesting going forward with them. As far as Kansas, not really much to say about them. I think that fans are kind of up in arms about what's going on in that program at the moment. Next up will be my USC Trojans going on the road to Clemson. Another tough road game for my boys. 44-24, pretty good win. Wasn't very happy with some of the big plays given up on defense by the Trojans, but when Clemson has some weapons and they have a veteran quarterback, so I'm not surprised they were able to move the ball on my defense. Mary Plank is continuing to dominate. Maybe not his best game so far, but he still threw for over 600 yards and 3 touchdowns. Really excited about the passing attack. The run game didn't look very good this game. Got a couple of touchdowns in the goal line situations, but really didn't run for high yard averages that I would prefer. But I'll take it, another road win. It's always tough to get a road win. Clemson moves to 0-2, and I don't quite know what their future is going to hold. That's a tough division with Syracuse. To keep pace with Syracuse, you're already 2 games back, and so it's going to be a long season for Clemson if they don't start to turn it around very quickly. Next up is Auburn hosting LSU. LSU came out of that shootout against Alabama Week 1 where they lost. They put up big points in this one again with 35, and Auburn scored 18. So Auburn moves to 0-2, but they've been in both of the games compared to last year where they really didn't compete as well. I think Auburn's taking a good step forward. They're right in the games, kind of like Texas. So it's just a matter of time before they get this team rolling. LSU, I think they're still, one of the top teams in this division, and they just got to keep pace with, the likes of Texas A&M and Alabama going forward. The young John Fox looks really good. And Johnny Simmons is probably one of the best weapons in football right now, and so they got that offense completely changed from the ground chuck that they used to do with Figueroa. They're airing it out. Fox has thrown the ball over 100 times in 2 games, and so they're completely changing their style in a year. Last but not least, we got the Aggies of Texas A&M hosting Michigan Wolverines. I really like this matchup just because Michigan has been a really good team in the last year or so, and they had a good first week. A&M is a team that looks like an up-and-coming team. They took that team from the dumps up to 8-8 last year. They got a new quarterback this year, and O'Connor came over from Arizona. He had a big game in this one, 498 yards, 2 touchdowns. Michigan's quarterback, they went back to the young Ralph Smith, who they played 2 years ago, and he just hasn't really responded. He didn't play very well in this 10 for 33, as well as the freshman Raymond Levine. He came in for 20 passes and only completed 8. So they just could not get their passing game with any kind of consistency or rhythm in this one. And they didn't run the ball good either. They only ran 11 times, probably because they were behind mostly. But when you're not running the ball and you're really inconsistent with your completion percentage, it's going to be hard for Michigan to win games. They got a big one coming up this week where they host Alabama, so that'll be a big test for them to see if they can bounce back from this one. And that's your week 1, week 2 recap. Try to do this every once in a while if I get a chance. Hope everybody has a great Thanksgiving, and we'll talk to you all later.